And I know this month is a month that our nation and other nations around the world um, celebrate the same month. Uh, I don't think celebrate is perhaps the right word, but rather observe Memorial Day. And the typical meaning of Memorial Day is a day that is set aside to remember those who have gone before us, to remember those who have made the supreme sacrifice in preserving our freedom, and and who have done so in a manner that we know that our lives would not be the same if it were not for these actions, for these others being who they are and doing what they have done. And we are truly grateful for that. We are truly grateful. But for me, the whole idea of Memorial Day also opens up the recognition of not only those who have served in the military, but of each and every person who has come into my life and who has truly been a blessing while they were there, and who has now gone, who has now moved on, who is in the next phase of life, the next great adventure, as I like to say. And many of you know that our dear friend Pete, you would hear Pete on the conference bridge, and Sunday mornings he was out in Fort Worth. And Pete and Karen, we would always say hi, and they would say hi back. But our dear friend Pete left us about 10 days ago. And he had been with us, with Lori and I, since the very beginning. And I just want to take a few minutes to acknowledge what a wonderful man he was, and I'm sure he still is. What a blessing he has been in our lives. And then we want to talk a little bit about the kind of the bigger issue of what are we here for as in this human experience? What are you and I here for? What is the purpose of this life? What does love and friendship really mean to us? How does it affect us? And what is this mortal life that we live? What is it in terms of eternity, in terms of our true nature? And then, of course, how do we, as human beings, how do we say goodbye? How do we let go of those who have come into our lives and been so near and dear to us? So this is, to me, is a celebration. We are celebrating life. We're celebrating not only an individual life of Pete, not only the individuals who have been so precious to us, but we are celebrating life itself. There is this thing called life, and you and I did not create it. We are a part of it. It's in one of the Buddhist books I was reading. It was explained. It's as if the game was started before we got here. And we just kind of came into consciousness here on this plane of existence. And something is going on all around us. And probably the highest name we can give it is life. It is just life. It is livingness. And we are a part of it. And as we come into this recognition, this realization that we are a part of it, we can either be afraid of it, or we can learn to love it and to trust it and to recognize that each and every part of life, each and every part of the process of life is good. Each and every part of the process of life is for a purpose. The process of being born, the process of dying, the process of living in between. It is all God. It is all good. And at some point as spiritual beings, as students of spiritual truth, we have to wrestle with that question. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? What is life? And can we trust it? So today, I'm suggesting that we celebrate life, all of life. We celebrate every part of life. One of the books that we studied, that Pete studied with us on the Skype group, was by Walter Starkey, who is a modern-day mystic. And Walter wrote another book, not the one we were studying, but he wrote another book. And he said, it's all God, the manure and the roses. It's all God. And as we enter into that deeper relationship with life, that deeper relationship with God, we come to accept that it's all God, it's all good. You know, in our human experience, we tend to be afraid of things and label things as bad and wicked, and the experience of them may be, you know, the experience may be a horrible experience that we have, but that doesn't change the fact that life itself is good, and the experience is only a temporary thing that passes. So Lori and I guess in the late 90s, thereabouts, we earnestly decided that we wanted to continue our studies in religious science, as it was called at that time, and to go on to become ministers, which is eventually how we got down to Wilmington and the Coastal Carolina Religious Science Center. And very early on in that process, very early on when we were meeting people and we were having classes, we would drive down from Durham down to Wilmington on a Sunday afternoon, and we would have classes much like we do on Skype. We would read a book together, we would discuss it, and everybody would share ideas. We were doing these things, you know, long before we were ministers. And somewhere in the midst of that, Pete arrived in our life, and I can't remember exactly when. I can't pin it down and tell you the day. It just seems like he was with us forever. And I know he came to us through Mike Keene, our dear friend Mike, who left us last year, because Mike was very instrumental in getting us started. And Pete and Mike had been in the Navy together. They had been in nuclear submarines together, worked on nuclear power plants, and they knew each other for very, very many years. And they had actually gone to religious science church out in San Diego when they were stationed out in San Diego. And Pete came to us at that time, and he stepped into our lives, and it was like we had always known him. He was that kind of a man that he would step into your life, and he would say, I know this guy from someplace. Where have I met him before? He's so familiar to me. And he was just that kind of an outgoing, kind, and loving person, you know. Hey, bud, he would say, you know, and it was just like a term of endearment, you know, you're my friend, you're my bud. And anything that he could possibly do for us, he would do. He was just that kind of a loving and supporting person. And I think everybody I know that met him, whether we knew him for 20 years or we knew him for 5 years or we knew him for a few weeks, he was just the epitome of friendship. He was the epitome of what it means to be a friend and to have a friend. And Pete had studied with some of the most famous teachers. I don't know a better term, but best known perhaps teachers, but some of the teachers in religious science who go back a long ways. They were there almost at the beginning of the movement, and their works are kind of well known and spoken of in the movement. People would say, well, I studied with so-and-so, and Pete would say, yeah, I know him, or, you know. And he was so firmly grounded in what we teach and his understanding, not just through an intellectual book learning, reading kind of thing, but he lived it. He lived it. He took what we teach and he internalized it. And I know for many years Pete was associated with a self-help company out of Texas. They sold motivational tapes for sales forces and for individuals who want to improve their life. And he was a speaker for them. He would go out and he would deliver public talks. So he was an experienced public speaker. He was an experienced student of religious science, and yet he would always seem to love to sit and listen to somebody else give a talk or to explain their ideas. Even though he may have had a depth of knowledge and an ability that was equal or superior to whoever he was listening to, myself included. But he always just seemed to have this thirst for more, this thirst for a greater experience. And many times when we were on the class and we would be kicking ideas around as we do on the Wednesday night group, we read something and say, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to you? Many times when Pete would step in and offer his view, his opinion of what we were reading, it was so deep, it was so insightful, it was in some cases profound, and it was easy to see that here was someone who knew more than just having read about something, but he had rolled it over in his mind. He had compared it to other things that he had learned, and he truly had a deep opinion, a deep feeling about it. So it was always a great delight to have him with us. And in the last years or so of his life, excuse me, even though health issues were cropping up and he eventually lost most all of his sight, it never seemed to phase his attitude. It never seemed to slow him down. He was always optimistic that the process of affirmative prayer and treatment would help, and he was always optimistic that he would find a way. He would find a way to be able to express himself and to live and to still be joyful in conditions that many people would be very depressed, give up, those sorts of things. He didn't. He had such a strong faith in life, such a strong trust in life, that no matter what seemed to happen, he seemed to know that this too shall pass. This too is temporary. So to me, when I heard that Pete had passed, that he had left us, my sense was one of gratitude. I was so lucky to have known this man, so lucky to have had him come into my life when he did, as a true friend, as a supporter, as someone who could teach me when I needed teaching, just someone who was always there for me, someone who was always willing to accept me just as I was and to be my friend. And we will miss him dearly, because he is the epitome of that kind man, that friend, the person who accepts you as you are and who's willing to go with you wherever it is that you want to go. So I wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit, because we all have people and have had people who have come into our lives at one point or another, who have been that kind of a mentor, that kind of a friend, that kind of a person that you just like to know. And they have touched us deeply, and then they have gone, they have left us. And I want to consider just a little bit what this idea of friendship is and what it means to us together as we go through our spiritual growth together. And I can't help but go back to times when we were children, when we were small, and we had a friend. We had a friend who was our best buddy. We had somebody who we would walk a mile out of our way if they were going someplace else, just so that we could be with them as we walked together. If they had something to go to, we would go and sit and wait outside on the step for them until they got finished their music lesson or whatever it was, and then they would come back out, and we would be together again. Where I grew up, the streets were tar and gravel streets. They weren't even paved, and if you've ever been on those kind of streets, they're very bumpy. And we would try to roller skate on them when we were kids. Now these are not the fancy roller skates that you get in a roller rink that look like a shoe with wheels on it. For those of you who are old enough, you'll know what I'm talking about. They're little metal skates that kind of clamped on over your shoes, and you had a key and you had to adjust it. It reminds me of the Melanie song, I got a brand new roller skate, you got a brand new key. And of course they came in pairs, and we would put them on and strap them on over our sneakers that we wore, and then go out and try to skate on this tar and gravel road. Of course, it always led to plenty of skinned knees and elbows. But some of our friends didn't have skates. You know, some kids had skates and some kids didn't have skates. I don't know what they cost in those days, but they cost something. And what we would do is if you had two skates and your friend had none, well, you'd give your friend one of your skates. See? And they would put one skate on and you would put the other skate on. And, and each you would go out and you would try to skate with one skate, you know, pushing off with the other foot like the kids do on the scooters. And there we would be going up and down this tar and gravel road with the little metal wheels just kind of making all kinds of racket and falling down all over the place and skinning every appendage that could be skinned. We never thought anything of it. You know, it wasn't like a sacrifice or anything like that. It was you're with your friend. You're with your friend and you're out skating. You're just being with your friend. And perhaps that's, you know, kind of one of the things in true friendship, when we look at true friendship, or we look, you know, to expand it even further to true love, is your friends typically don't have an agenda, you know. Most people we meet in this life have an agenda. They want something from us. They want to sell something to us in order to get something from us. They want us to do something for them. You know, all of those different transactional relationships that we have as we go through life, you know. I always tell people, if somebody's getting angry with you, figure out what it is they want from you, because if they don't want anything, they're not going to waste their time being angry with you. Once they figure out that they're not going to get what they want, they go bother somebody else, what usually happens. But a true friend is somebody who comes into your life and they have no agenda. Don't want anything from you, don't want to give you anything, don't want to change you in any way. They just want to be with you, and they just want to share with you. If they've got a candy bar, they'll give you half. If they've got an ice cream cone, they'll give you half. You know, if you're sad, they'll sit with you and they'll be sad, and they'll give you an ear to listen, a shoulder to cry on. You know, somebody who just wants to be there, and just, if you're hurting, they're hurting, and they'll comfort you. They're there. It'll be okay. You know, and they don't have an agenda. They just love you and accept you for the way you are, for who you are. And if you change and grow, that's wonderful. And if you stay the same, that's wonderful too. It doesn't matter. They don't need anything from us. They don't want anything from us. And I think what that symbolizes for us, remember, kind of my view of the world, what makes it easier for me to understand the world is I think of everything in terms of symbols. None of this is permanent. None of this is real in terms of it does not have the power to propagate itself. This is all a symbol. This is like a dream. You know, in psychiatry, they tell people, think about your dreams and think about the symbols in your dreams and what do they truly represent to you. And I think that what we call being awake is just another level of the dream. It seems a little bit more real to us, but it is in fact nothing more than a projection of our consciousness, and we're trying to interpret it. And if you think of life that way, then everyone and everything in it becomes a symbol of something deeper. There's a deeper meaning, there's a deeper image behind everything. And if we can go towards that deeper meaning, we can sometimes extract very, very valuable information about ourselves and about life. And as I said on Mother's Day, when we were talking about mothers, you know, this idea of unconditional love, this idea of someone who will never quit on us, this idea of someone who accepts us just as we are, that is what we are drawn to. We are drawn to the people in life who treat us with this unconditional love. And I think that a true friend, I think that the kind of friend that Pete represents to me is that kind of person. is that kind of person who represents unconditional love to us. I'm sorry, I got something crawling on me here. So we are naturally drawn to this experience of unconditional love. We are naturally drawn to those who treat us well and who treat us kindly. Because that is the essence, I believe, of who and what we are. That is the essence of our spiritual nature. See, the divine is perfect love, by whatever name we choose to call it, whether we call it God, or we call it the divine, or we call it nature, or we call it love, or we call it first cause. It is perfect love, because love is the experience of the oneness. Love is the experience of unity. And as God is one with everything, it loves everything. And it loves everyone. It has no sense of self or of other. It only knows its own self. So it knows each and every one of us as an expression of itself, as an individualized, unique part of itself. And it has for us that unconditional love that we crave, that we are seeking, that we wish to experience more of. So when we find someone in our lives, someone who touches our life in the way that Pete has touched so many lives, I think what we are experiencing is a little bit of God, a little bit of God's love in that person, as that person, and through that person. And in this regard, they're an angel sent to us, a blessing sent to us. They are someone that we can look at, who we recognize as flesh and bones just as we are, but we can experience the soul. We can experience the spirit. They remind us that we are more than what we appear to be. They remind us that we too are spirit. So eventually we learn, through osmosis sometimes, through just hanging out with folks like Pete, who move us and inspire us and guide us. We start to learn that you and I, we are also God's instruments of this unconditional love. That we can have that same effect on others. That we can be someone who is there unconditionally for another. That we can love another just the way they are. Whether their behavior is what we would call good or what we would call bad doesn't matter. It doesn't stop us from loving them. Right? That love is not conditional. That we can see within each and every person whom we meet the presence and the activity of God, and we can love that. We can love that unconditionally. And we can be that light of love for others. Not that we do it or do an act of kindness because we want to be perceived as being kind. But we do it because that's who we are. That's what we are. We are an expression of God's love. I think you know what I mean. There's a difference between doing something out of a sense of obligation or doing, a sense of thinking, well, I ought to do this, I need to do this. It's the right and proper thing to do. We're doing it because it's something we really want to do. It's the way that we want to be. It's the love that we want to express. So if we think of the people whose lives have touched us the way that a dear friend has touched us, the way that unconditional love has touched us, we can start to appreciate our own nature a little bit more. We can start to appreciate that that unconditional love of God is really what we are. We can recognize that people who come into our lives may also be blessed by our unconditional love. And we ultimately realize that we must love ourselves that same way. We must come to recognize that when we look into the mirror, we are gazing past the flesh. We are gazing past the eyes that are looking back to us. And in the very mirror, we are experiencing the love of God that is deep inside us, that is us, that is expressing itself in this world. So a dear friend like Pete, a dear friend can be a spiritual guide, because by bestowing us with their unconditional love, they are really inviting us to discover that within ourselves. You know, the human way of doing things is we keep trying to go around and find other people to do stuff for us. You know, we think it's all out there. But our friend sees it within us and encourages us to find it within our own self. And that kind of brings us to the big question, the next big question of why am I here? You know, we talk about who am I, and I think we touched on that. I am an individualized expression of the divine. I may not always act like that. I may not always completely understand what that means, but my friend treats me that way. But why are we here? Why are we here? You know, is this thing that we call life? Is it a chemical accident? You know, did the dust of the earth get together and create intelligence? Create consciousness? Or did the consciousness of the divine form the dust of the earth into these bodies that we use while we're here? It's an important question. It's an important question for us to ask and answer on our spiritual journey. So the materialist view of the world is that the dust of the earth got together and somehow created the consciousness that we recognize as ourselves and the consciousness of others. But when the body dies, the consciousness dies, and it's all over. And we have to say to ourselves, if that is the case, then is there any purpose to life? Any at all? Does it matter? Does anything matter? You know, some of the philosophers who said, nothing matters, doesn't matter. Does it matter whether you live your life as what people would say, a good person or a kind person, or as a selfish and wicked person? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It's all just the dust of the earth interacting with itself, and someday the earth too will be gone. So what does it matter? And then the spiritual view says, no. There's more to it than that. See? That matter does not create consciousness out of itself, but consciousness created matter. The invisible and unformed energy of the universe took form that we know as matter. And what caused it to do so? What set it into motion? Is there a conscious awareness before there is form, before there is matter? And the spiritual viewpoint says, yes, there is. Yes, there is. From the Upanishads, we are told that which is before or beyond thought, but from which thought comes. That which is before words, beyond words, but from which words come. That is the divine. It is ineffable. It can't be named. So again, we're told neti neti, not this, not that. In China, we're told the Tao that can be named is not the real Tao. Beyond ideas, beyond concepts, before any of that was, God is. And it brings into creation, into form, into time and space, the perfect representation, the perfect expression of its own thought. The thought of the divine moves upon the unformed energy and it takes form. Right in the beginning, there was the void and the chaos, and God spoke, and the void and the chaos gave birth to the creation. So the spiritual point of view tells us that we are not simply bags of bones and flesh that will someday return to the dust of the earth. And that consciousness that was us is gone. But rather the spiritual point of view tells us that the spirit that we are was before this body was born and will be after this body is gone. And we come then and say, well, what is this purpose of life? See, why are we here? Are we supposed to go out and do a lot of stuff? Are we supposed to make a lot of money? Are we supposed to build tall buildings? Are we supposed to found organizations and do great works? Are we supposed to be kind and benevolent to each other? Is it important that we make a lasting impression on others? All these different things that come up. And Dr. Holmes tells us in the textbook, he says, the perfect of life is to live. He says it's not important that we make an impact on a single other person. What's important is that we have learned how to live. And I think that goes back to what I was saying, is if we try to do good for the sake of being do-gooders, we're missing the point. We do good because that is our very nature. So rather than running out and trying to change the world and save the world from itself, our first task is to learn what life is and what we are as an expression of life, and to learn how to live. And as we do that, that requires us then to go in and explore our spiritual nature and to discover the very presence of the divine that is within us, within all persons, and to begin to live our lives as spiritual beings, not human beings, but spiritual beings. We start to understand what Jesus said what he meant when he said to be in the world but not of it. Another of my favorite teachers, Joel Goldsmith, puts it this way, that when we first come into a spiritual awakening, we first start to understand that we are spiritual beings having this experience here on earth in this time and this place. What our tendency is we want to use the spiritual power. We want to call God down, if you will, into our human experiences and our human conditions, and we want to get God to make things better for us. Get me a better job, a better house, a better spouse, lots of money, and as Janis Joplin said, a Mercedes-Benz. We're trying to use the spiritual power, trying to use God for a better human experience. And it's natural that we do that. It's part of the learning process. But at some point we begin to realize that we're not human. We're having a human experience, but we're not human. That is, being human does not define everything that we are. That we are spirit. And at that point, then our goal changes from having a better human experience to discovering more of the spiritual nature that we are. we stop thinking of terms of limitation. Joseph Campbell tells us that the concept of God is a metaphor for everything that transcends the limitations of the human mind. And if you think about the human mind knows limitations. We know beginning, we know middle, we know end. And yet the divine is that which is never born and never dies. We know that there's a limit to how much power and what it can do. The greatest power that we can think of, there's a limit to it. And yet the divine is omnipotent. There are no bounds to its power. We recognize that there's a limit to what we can know. And yet the divine is omniscient. So Campbell tells us that this concept of God is the metaphor for everything that transcends the human consciousness of limitation. And as we start to grow spiritually, our idea of who and what we are and what life itself is transcends this idea that the flesh limits us and defines us, and that we are no more than the dust of the earth that has somehow created consciousness out of itself. So I think then our purpose of living, our purpose of coming here, is to discover that we are spiritual. You know, in other cultures have different views of what the purpose of life is. And I love something that I read about the Aboriginal people of Australia. And what it said is that they consider this life here on this earth as a vacation, as a holiday. That we come from the dream time and we go back to the dream time. And while we are here to play, to have fun, and to enjoy. And I just mention that because it is a totally different view than the materialistic view that we get in our culture, which is that we have to do stuff. We have to die with the most toys because then we get to win, you know. Even in the graveyard, there's competition. Some stones are taller than the other and bigger than the other, and some plots have little fences around them, and some have stone buildings. And it seems like even in death, people want to win. They want to have the biggest tomb. And that's not what life is all about. Life is about discovering our soul. It is about learning more of who and what God as us is. And it is expressing that. Now, as we do that, naturally we have an impact on the lives of those around us. Naturally we love more freely and more fully and more kindly as we do that. But we do that out of the beingness that we are, out of the isness, out of the I amness, out of the love that we are. We do that because we can't help ourselves. We can't help ourselves but loving another because we recognize that there is no such thing as another. Dr. Holmes tells us, I am not my brother's keeper, I am my brother. You and I are one. So I believe this purpose of life is for us to just simply experience more of that unity, to dissolve the illusions of the barriers that separate us, and to embrace life itself and to embrace each other with this feeling of oneness that we recognize as the kind of friendship that Pete offered us in his life as he was here. So then that brings us to the final consideration for today, which is, well, where do we go when we leave here? Where are we going? Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? I am an individualized expression of the divine. I am here to experience more of that in this environment. And where we go is to another environment to continue our journey. Dr. Holmes tells us that he actually believed that we have bodies within bodies within bodies. And that when we make our transition, when we leave this world, it is similar to taking off a coat and laying it down. But the next form that we need is already with us. And wherever spirit goes, spirit cloaks itself in the perfect form to express itself in that environment. You know, it doesn't matter where our consciousness is. It will be cloaked in the right form to express itself in that environment. If we found ourselves on planet Mars, we would have whatever form is appropriate to express ourselves in that situation. So we want to think what Goldsmith told us again, I mentioned it a couple weeks ago, about this lifetime being a parenthesis in eternity. You know, eternity has no beginning and it has no end. And yet somehow, somewhere within eternity, there is this parenthesis, which is the day we're born and the day we die. And there's all of the living that goes on in between. But if we step back far enough and take a look at it, that the parenthesis is nothing. It is nothing because eternity continues. So we come from the dream time. We come from the experience of the eternal. And we go through the parentheses of birth, and we have this experience here on life, on planet Earth. We have this experience of life where we learn how to love. We learn how to love. And at some point, we pass through the parentheses of death. And we continue on. We continue on in the eternity, in our new form, in our new surroundings, in our new experience. And I always ask people to consider when we're dealing with the loss of a loved one, which is, again, Dr. Holmes tells us, if we did not grieve, it would be unusual. We can't help but miss them, even though we know that they continue on. We can't help but love them. We can't help but feel that sense of loss from that great friendship and that great love that was in our lives. But as we come into this world, the divine has already provided for us everything we need to survive and to thrive. The air that we needed to breathe was here before we got here. The photons of the sunlight that illuminate this day began their journey from the center of the earth 1,000,000 years ago. So for the children who are coming into the world today, God prepared this day for them 1,000,000 years ago. The food we need to eat, the water we need to drink, the loving hands to take care of us. We're all here when we got here. And we have to recognize that as Pete moved to the other side, that the loving hands were there to greet him as well and welcome him as a friend and to show him the unconditional love that he has shown us. So I'd like to close today with a kind of a guided meditation of releasing and letting go. And this is going to be our closing treatment. And we'll have no announcements. There's no mastermind or Skype group this week. So we'll just do this meditation together, and that will be our close. And I invite you now to imagine that you are standing on a waterfront, a pier or a wharf, and you are next to a big cruise ship. And there's lots of commotion going on as the ship is getting ready to depart. The band is playing up on the deck. The stevedores are still loading cargo and luggage. People are all standing along the rails on the deck of the ship, and they're looking down onto the pier to see their loved ones. And as you look up in the crowd, there you can see him. Our Pete's beautiful smiling face. He is beaming, he is looking down at us, he is waving, and he's looking forward to his journey. And he takes a roll of of ribbon of construction paper and tosses it down to us. So he's holding one end of the ribbon and we're holding the other. And this is what they did from the ships in the old days so that people could maintain contact with their loved ones for as long as possible. And we're standing there looking up and we're waving at him and he's looking back down and waving at us. And we hear the ship's horn blow. One long, low blast. It means its ship is about to move. And we hear the engines as they come to life. And we can feel the ship starting to back out of the slip. And we're holding on to the end of our piece of ribbon. And we're walking along the pier as far as we can go so we can maintain contact for as long as possible. But eventually we can't walk any further. But we won't let go. And Pete won't let go. So eventually the confetti paper snaps. And we continue to wave, and we continue to hear the band playing, and we continue to hear the joyful sounds from the deck as people are excited to be on their journey. We can see Pete waving to us as we wave back to him. And the silhouette of the ship gets smaller and smaller as it approaches the horizon. And eventually all we can see is the smokestack. And then finally, just the smoke. And we turn to those who have come with us to say goodbye. We wipe the tears from our eyes. We say, oh look, there he goes. But there's another shore, a distant shore. And there are people gathered on the pier there, and they are straining their eyes, and somebody says, look, I see the smoke. And somebody else says, yes, and now I see the stack. And in a little while, somebody says, there's the hull, here comes the ship. And they are joyful, and they are celebrating. And they say to each other, oh look, here comes Pete. We release our dear friend to his next great adventure. We know that he is greeted by kind and loving people who are happy to see him. And we trust that when it comes our day to take the journey, that he will be there on the pier waiting for us with a big smile on his face. We are truly grateful to have known such a wonderful person. We release him and let him go, and so it is.